So this is the second type of multiple choice question. Overall, right? You have on the exam multiple choice questions for writing, which is what we just did, and then multiple choice questions based on reading. And so that's really asking you to focus in on a speech, a letter, an essay, and think about it from the perspective like reading like a writer, right? So which is where we read for rhetorical choice, for specific word type, for the purpose behind and the message behind the speech or writing or essay or letter. Just a reminder that this is, again, overall 45 questions for 60 minutes. And then the reading questions account for just a little bit more than half, and then the writing questions account for the other piece. And I think a great refresher would be this video that I have linked, which is the very first video that we watched in the school year, which is reading like a writer, and then what we call the rhetorical situation. And so when we take a look at our first question type, this really is similar to the writing multiple choice question type, which of the following? So we are going to figure out what they're talking about. What do they want us to find? That is the target. So here it's which of the following, and then we have exigence. I skipped over this because I'm just really looking at that key word. And this one you kind of have to know. There's a way to figure it out if you don't know, but just a reminder that exigence is the igniting push, the thing that kind of like lights the fire that is the speech or the essay or the letter. It's like, why did the writer write this or speak this? There is a reason, and it has to do with the context, the situation. It could be an event. And if you didn't know, or if you forgot what exigence means, you could think purpose. You could think, why did the writer write this? It's not exactly necessarily the main idea, right? So there has to be the main idea or the message is sort of like a product or in relation to the exigence. The exigence pushes it, and the message is sort of what you get as a result of the exigence. So if we're thinking about that, we do need to go back to the blurb, and the blurb is the very top of the passage. So this looks very similar to the actual rhetorical analysis essay, right? They have a blurb, and then they have a text, a speech, a letter, so on. But this is the multiple choice version of that. So I'm going to read it, and it is a speech delivered by a leading women's rights activist in 1913. So in my head, I kind of know, all right, this is historical. It's at a time when women did not have the rights that men had. And so I'm also going to read the very beginning. I'm noticing this is a very long sentence. So I'm going to look for the actor of the sentence, or the doer or the subject, and I'm going to look for the action, the verb. So who's doing what? That is a really quick strategy to read, and to read in a quick way. And so that is something I want you to practice. So if I said to you, she is, if I were a man, so I assume that using the traditional gender norms of 1913, I would assume that we're talking about a woman. And I am looking for the big verbs. I come from a country, yet denies me, an inhabitant of the country. So this phrase, denies me, is huge, right? If she is denied, she is less than others, right? She does not have. And then I'm just going to read the very last sentence, kind of doing the same thing. I'm looking for the subject, the actor, the doer, and then the action. Who is doing what? It is necessary to explain, and then explain why women have adopted revolutionary methods in order to win the rights of citizenship. Okay, so already, if I were to go back to the paragraph or the actual question, I'm going to then begin to isolate my answer choices. So someone before said it's like chunking the answer choices, and that's what we're doing. We want our eye to go to some key phrases, and then we kind of want to just focus on those first to see what we can eliminate. So I'm going to isolate just the beginning phrases and the answers. You may remember with the letter to George Bush that we did in class for multiple choice writing, we were looking at the very beginning verb phrases. Here, they tend not to be verb phrases. They are noun phrases, but we're still going to take a look at the very beginning word of word, word to word, word in word, those constructions. Okay, so we have lack of interest. I'm just going to circle that or mentally focus on that in my head, and then just kind of get rid of all the other words. Again, just to see what I can eliminate and to speed up. Growing trends of using violence. Okay, so if I'm thinking about lack of interest, so far, I'm not seeing the lack of interest piece. There's not really evidence of that. I'm going to hold off on that. Growing trend of using violence. Again, haven't really talked about that yet. Limited resources available to women. Yeah, I mean, she used the word deny. I am denied, right? That tells me that there are limited resources. Widening disparities in the socioeconomic circumstances. No, and then public resentment of the high tax rate. No, it wasn't about that. It was equal citizenship. However, now I'm thinking that it's C. If I really had to rush and go and get on to the next one, then I would just choose that and move along. I can make the guess, the inference that it is C, and not the others, even though we don't know for sure if it's about a changing the existing power structure. I'm inferring that it is because the existing power structure of that time was around men versus women and the gender denial that was happening for women. So again, what did I do? I found the target in the actual question. What was I going to focus on? And this was exigence. I'm going to read the blurb back in the passage, and I'm going to notice the doer, the actor, and the subject. The act or the subject, the actor, and the action, which is the verb. So who and what. And then I'm going to, after I've isolated those key verb phrases in the passage out, right, with the actor and the action, to kind of get a sense of what is going on, I might want to just read the very topic sentences of a few of the paragraphs. I felt that I kind of had enough to go with just to be able to eliminate choices, and then I went back and I isolated some of the beginning phrases. Once I could take away answer choices from the beginning phrases, I double checked it to the endings just to make sure. And is the writer does something in order to blank. So this is a little bit more open-ended. You do need to have an understanding of the writer's position. So again, this was found from our previous question when we had to think about the exigence or the igniting factor that pushed the writer to write in the first place. And then we know going back to the passage that, in fact, we are familiar somewhat with the writer's position. And again, this is a little tricky, but I'm teaching you how to take this test in a very short amount of time, right? So we haven't done a close read of this passage, and that is a little bit controversial and a little bit risky. But we did we focused in on the subject or the actor of the sentence, the doer, with the action or the verb to figure out who and what. And then we read the last sentence of the very first paragraph. That is not always the thesis statement. The thesis statement can come at the very end of the entire passage. But I'm also seeing, again, looking for some of those key doers and the subjects, and then the action, the who and the what. I said, women are human beings. She's getting off to the her thesis there, and she repeats it here. And I'm just like skimming here. let's see, she says, speaking about women who are advocating for women's rights in England. She's also pointing to the audience, which is men. It's very irrational, you say. And she's pointing to their particular argument. And then she's giving an example. Now, I'm not reading it. My eyes are just going to structure, what she's doing. She has a rhetorical question in there. Let's see. And she continues ending. She has another rhetorical question. And really making a statement with that rhetorical question in that example. So knowing that and just doing a high-level overview, I mean, we could have stopped it when we think we found her thesis. And she is going to explain why women have adopted revolutionary methods in order to win the rights of citizenship. And so with that information, we go back to what we're doing. And then this is a go-to question because they actually give us the lines of the paragraph. But I'm not going to go back to those lines. I've read them enough so that I know that that was her highlighting the entire point of view, perspective, and thesis. And so now I'm going to see what they want. The writer contrasts a hypothetical rhetorical situation with her own primarily too. Now, that kind of sends me in a different direction mentally because I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Hypothetical rhetorical situation with her own. So I'm going to hold off on that and I'm just going to look at what the writer does. Like she's doing something primarily to. So we need to find out, I can just stick in my head, and this is a little bit of like cheating, but I can stick in my head instead of contrast a hypothetical rhetorical situation, I can say the writer does something in order to. And it's going to match the writer's thesis, what the writer wants. It's going to match that, what she's fighting for. So as long as we know that, what the writer is fighting for, what does the writer want, what is the writer's message, then we can go ahead and answer this question without getting caught up in the stress of figuring out, wait a minute, contrast what? So she does something in order to. Let's cross out any responses, any answer choices that do not match her main motivation we know of in her speech from the very beginning paragraph. So I'm going to go back and figure out what we can eliminate because remember this test is about eliminating the wrong answers, not about finding the right answer. All right, so I'm reading the first one. Again, the writer's message or point is to illustrate the double standards for men and women. Okay, yes. I'm going to hold off on the extension here, beginning with in. I'm not, my brain doesn't need to get clogged up with that. That sounds about right. I'm going to put a mental question mark next to it. I'm not going to mentally cross it off. I'm going to move on. The next phrase that stands out to me that I'm testing, women are more reluctant to adopt something. She didn't really have the tone of women being reluctant. Like that wasn't her main, something that she would work primarily to do, right? So let me move on. I've circled that and I am going to compare it to others before I necessarily cross it off. But I kind of just mentally did it in my presentation. So let's just I kind of just did that. But so this one is the influence of women on democratic culture. She is saying that women do not have influence. I mean, she's saying they should have influence, but that they haven't been able to influence. So there's no example of influence. So I'm going to cross that off. Remember, we're thinking, okay, what is the position of the writer at this time from what we know at the beginning? That women's civil rights have been eroded. This, I think, is the biggest distractor. I think this is the one that a lot of students would choose because they're like, oh yeah, they're minimized, they're eroded. But take a look, have been. They haven't been eroded because they haven't they've never really been at a place that could be taken back from, right? They've always been baseline low. So I'm going to cross that out and then highlight the obstacles of women when emigrating from other countries, even if we didn't know what the word emigrate was, right? There's not talk of women from other countries. It's not about that. That does leave me with A, and I might want to test it with the little part of the sentence that I didn't really consider, which is in the political realm. But at this point, if I'm sure that I've crossed off at least half, then I'm going to go with the one that stands out to me that matches her position, the main message. So let's just pick up on our main strategies here with a question that says, writer does something in order to. I very importantly used what came before. So if you're taking the test sequentially, which is one argument to take it, right, in the order that it's written, you could potentially use what you've learned and found out from your engagement with the questions before. And so with the questions before, we really focused in on the exigence or the push that made the writer speak. And then we, by focusing in on the actor or the subject or the doer of the sentence, and then the action or the verb, we focused in on the who and the what. We began to determine the writer's position, perspective, and also the main message, the point, the thesis statement, the thing that the writer is fighting for. After we found that out, we're kind of golden because then we have this question that follows. Notice I didn't really technically answer the question as it was written because I took out the very thing that they wanted us to contrast. Now, you could go back and test it to see if you'd find the same answer. I did that because of time, because it's going to take us mentally more energy to think, okay, contrasting a hypothetical rhetorical situation. So I just made it the writer does something in order to, and by it. So again, which of the following, and then we're going to figure out the writer's position. So this is best characterized as the writing position, the writer's position. So I don't, all this extra stuff that starts with on the relevance of her, that's, it's important, but I wouldn't get hung up on it. The most important point is that what is the writer's position, on the topic, right? What gets a little confusing is parsing out or chunking out on the relevance of her topic for American women. So if I were to just jump to what is the writer's position, something about relevance, and then we know her topic is about, civil rights for women, for American women. Okay, so I pieced it together. All right, again, we are interested in eliminating. So I'm going to give you a quick choice or a quick strategy to work through your answer choices, and we're wanting to just skim all the answer choices, and one strategy is to figure out, okay, what's in common, right? And so it kind of gives it away with the quotes, and that's a helpful thing for you to notice, like, okay, site-wise, I see this thing with quotes. I see this quote thing, I see 3 quotes. I see it here, here, and here. So notice patterns in the answer choices themselves and how many times, and that is a detail that we're noticing it's repeated in 3 of the questions. So 3 out of 5, that is a focus area. And if I was a betting person, which I'm not, but if you were to say right now, get it down to 2 or 3 answer choices, I would get it down to these 3, just because this is a focus, and they're having your eye focused to these. So just one, if you had 0 time left and you really wanted to make an educated guess very quickly, and if you can notice the repetition of something like the particular quote that's repeated 3 times, your eye should go to one of those 3. But interestingly, I see this as are so well off, as perceived as well off. Again, I see my 10, so my 11 is right underneath it. You see, in spite of a good deal that we hear about revolutionary methods not being necessary for women, American women, because American women are so well off, most of the men in the United States quite calmly. Okay, so yes, it has us continue, but I'm getting the idea, right, from the writer's position. We know she's a woman fighting for civil rights for women, and that she's saying um, American women are so well off. I mean, they're really getting into the tone. Like, what is her tone there? And her tone is, in fact, American women are not well off because they're in a really bad position. So her tone is the sarcasm, the irony. So we're going to go back to our actual question. We do need to know, and I misspoke a couple minutes ago, we absolutely do need to know the perimeter, like what is around this particular quote. Notice it wasn't quoted in the actual text, right? That's why they have this little bracket. They're referring to the phrase "so well off," and so just so you know, that's what this means right here. You don't actually have to read it, but your eye shouldn't go to an actual quote in the text. Just so we know that. I also didn't read the entire 11 through 30 passage. I needed to know, okay, what was the point with that so well off? And for this, it was very important to know that that was sarcastic and part of verbal irony. And I chose to focus in on that because it's repeated 3 times in the answer choices. And I'm thinking, if I was a betting person, that, the focus should be there. And then I'm noticing, are they all exactly the same? And no, the question is written differently for these two than it is for that one. So I'm just going to put that in the back of my mind. And as I progress forward, again, I haven't crossed anything out yet. I'm just making some observations. I'm going to box out our verb phrases, and I want to figure out if that matches our writer's position. And so it is unnecessary for them to adopt the methods. But I'm thinking here, because American women are so well off, it is unnecessary for them to adopt the methods. That's absolutely not true, right? American women are not so well off. She was being sarcastic. So I'm going to take that one out immediately. And then I see that this is a similar construction. So yes, I've boxed out they have access to methods. And I'm thinking just for that pink box, I want to cross it off. But then I also know that this statement here, American women are so well off, I can cross that out. They're not. And so this is really banking on our understanding of tone, and that we understand, in order to figure out the tone of her phrase "so well off," we needed to know her position, her who she was as the speaker. And that's always, 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 this goes back to speaker, audience, position, exigence. That's so important when answering these questions. Notice all of these questions have been centered around that. So for these two, C and D, I don't see a "so well off." I'm just going to read it out, and I'm going to mentally box out the verbs. They have succeeded. No, they have not. Excuse me, not in 1913. That's her whole point. And then I didn't even read the rest of that sentence. Just, they have succeeded. Again, if I'm working fast, this is what I'm going to do, right? This one, they're best. Oh, the methods described by the writer are best suited for American men. No, she's writing how women are underserved and they need to fight for their civil rights. So no. And then that does leave us the last one. But let's say I had it down to even these 3, right? So if I were to deal with my theory that I think it's one of the well-off answer choices, and I've eliminated these 2, shouldn't I just eliminate this one? Aha, we need to read very carefully. This one is actually a different version. This is the answer is written differently. It's saying that women are perceived as well off. So immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's exactly what's happening. That's why this is sarcasm or verbal irony. So again, my theory was what is repeated, right? Do I notice anything? And if you do in answer choices, if you do notice that something is repeated in the how it's written, you put your attention there, right? And so if you can eliminate two of the similar ways, right, that it's written, and you're left with one, let's think that could be the one and then cross check it against the others. We always want to try to read through all of them to eliminate. And that leaves us with these two guys here. The only way I was able to answer this without reading lines 11 through 30, two things: knowing the general overall speaker, position, purpose, and out of that we figured out the tone, right? The message. And we did need to go back to once I noticed that, okay, they're focusing on this so well off phrase, and they did it 3 different times, and they referred to it, right, 3 different times, and I'm going to spend my time finding the phrase so well off. And again, I know I'm not looking for quotations because they have that little bracketed thing. They just referred to it. So I find the phrase and I realize, oh yeah, she's being sarcastic. I go back. So that is question flow. For this, we do need to go back to the lines that it refers to. This is a go-to question. Just really quickly, just to make sure we're on board with the who and the what, the actor and the subject. And then we want to compare what we know back to the writer's position or thesis, always, and then notice word charge. But first, let's figure out the question. So this is a go-to question, lines 11 through 23. They are the same lines as the previous question, just about. So these particular lines could be used to support which of the following claims about a writer's tone. So I get confused by that question. I'm going to turn it into a statement. So when I turn this question into a statement, it forces me to understand that I know what it's asking me in a way that is more direct. So the lines below, or the claims below, say something about the writer's tone. All right, so that's the statement that I need to figure out. So in other words, you're making it more direct for yourself, because otherwise you're thinking, okay, in context, what's that in context? So you get hung up on that. If they give you a section of text to go to, okay, then fine, you understand that, you know that. So leave it out of your memory as you figure out what it's asking you to do in the question. You know that A, B, C, D, and E are going to be claims. We know claims are just statements, right? So I think sometimes when we see claims, we get like really, our mind goes to like analyzing claim, evidence, reasoning. No, it's just here are 5 different statements about the writer's tone. So we need to understand that, they're all about the writer's tone. So match that to the lines 11 through 23. So that's what it's saying. Match the writer's tone in the statements below, right, to the lines 11 through 23, and you're finding the best fit. And so that's hugely important that you know that when they give you the location, and then they say, here are 5 different claims, what they're saying is, here's 5 different options, statements, and you have to find the one that best matches the specific lines that I was given. And this is, in particular, this one is about tone. And I think that for me was a huge, huge strategy that helped, because I would get caught up in this question and the claims, and claim questions are the ones that a lot of students get wrong, because I think their mind goes someplace else. So let's focus in on changing it to think, okay, here's the section of text that they give me. They're giving me 5 different options. Which is the best fit, right? Unless it says which is not the best fit. So let's say we didn't know. then let's leave those blank if we don't know those words, and let's deal with these three. Because my theory tells me anyway that this is like, if there's three of these, let's just focus on them and then go back to A and B. So these all have in common, she adopts a certain tone and then with her subject, right? 3 times. So the first one is a bold, forthright tone in approaching her subject. Again, we need to go back to that text just to remind ourselves, even though we've already been hanging out here with the previous questions, you see, in spite of a good deal that we hear about revolutionary methods not being necessary for American women, because American women are so well off, right? She's using that sarcasm. Right away, if we know from the previous question, by spending time with so well off, if we know that it's sarcasm, and then she starts with you see, okay, this is 1913, and she's talking to perhaps a male audience, then just knowing that it's sarcasm, even though you just saw what it was, probably, we are going to figure out that it's not an admiring tone. It's not going to be D. It's also not detached and impersonal, right? It's very rare that a speaker of a speech will be detached and impersonal, right? That's not going to happen. So it's not E, it's not D, right? She's not admiring. She's sarcastic, is like bold, direct. You know, it's forthright. It's pointing things out very clearly. So we think it's C, okay? Why isn't it A or B? Well, let's go back to what they have in common. Was she discussing American women? And was she discussing American men in that passage? Again, I'm taking my cues from how the question is written, what is in the actual question. And I'm going to go back just to see if she was, in fact, if that was her point, discussing American men and discussing American women. Or is she discussing that American women don't have the rights, right? That, but that they are human beings. And that's what you have to be careful of. That's her discussion. So in fact, even if you didn't know patronizing and ingratiating, you have to use what is in front of you in the actual answer choice. There are clues there in that answer choice. And the clue, think very, very carefully, wait a minute, was she really discussing her subject is the equal rights for American women? So in fact, it is C. And the way that we found that it is C is that we put the question into a statement. We know that when we see, or our brains have to learn that when we see specific lines, we have to immediately say, okay, which of the following is going to be a best match for that line? And then this target area was tone. We're going to put it into a statement, and then we are going to just notice any patterns, if there are any, in the way that answer choices are written. And we figured that C, D, and E were kind of in a pile, and then A and B were in a pile. And when we looked at it further, if we didn't know those tone words of patronizing and ingratiating, we then looked at the clues from the sentence, which is a discussion of American men. Was she discussing American men? Was she discussing American women? We did go back to that passage. It was also the passage that we dealt with in the previous question, so we might already be familiar with it. And then we know that because we were already hanging out in that part of the passage, it was the piece with the so well off, which was sarcastic. And she begins with you see, right? And it's 1913. So we always go back to the very beginning with the audience, the speaker, the context, right? The time, the exigence, always, always so important here. And we then determined in process of elimination that her tone is bold and forthright because we eliminated detached and impersonal. It's very rarely going to be that. And we also eliminated admiring. So here's where we are. in the third paragraph, we actually do want to go back to that third paragraph, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But before we do, we want to understand the questions so that we know what we're looking for in the third paragraph. The writer criticizes the logic of those who dismiss the methods of British feminists as irrational. Line 42 is the quote, on the grounds that they have. Now, let's consider, again, putting this into our own words. We need to figure out who the they, like those who dismiss the methods of British feminists as irrational. So we need to say, look, this writer is criticizing her opponents. That's all we need to say. And that her opponents happen to be a group of men or men in general. So we want to backtrack and find the pronoun they, just so we understand that they are the people who dismiss, and the people who dismiss are her opponents, and they are the male audience. And when we go to the third paragraph, we want to also note again that line 42, and line 42 is hanging out here in the middle. And so if we understand that knowing that line 42 and going there is not going to be enough. Yes, her audience, the male audience in general, has adopted a very irrational tone. And so I suggest reading the very end, and that's in pink. We'll kind of wrap it up if you don't have time to read everything else. Extends a thought. So each comma will give you more information about what came before. And so all of this stuff is like more information about what the men have been led to believe, right? That there's this feminist population, a new form of hysteria, irresponsibility of women breaking windows and burning letters and making everything all messed up, right? In terms of ruining businesses, and very irrational. Okay, so even if we were just, focused, we're really taking just the ending of this with what she wants to show. Oh, that was the animation gone wrong. That's why that's marked off first. Okay, so let's try to eliminate based on what we know. I'm not seeing any patterns, just real quick as I scope it out. I'm not reading for patterns. I'm just using my eyesight to look for patterns. So again, what is she trying to show, right? That they have misconstrued the feminist reasons for employing strategies they have chosen to employ. And so if I didn't understand misconstrued, construed comes from, I see the word constructed. So that's like a negative prefix, like mistake, misrepresented, miscommunicated. So put together, right? Did not put together. Misunderstood. I'm going to substitute that word for the word maybe I don't understand is misconstrued. They've misunderstood the feminist reasons for employing the strategies that they have chosen to employ. That seems to be one. I'm not going to check it off right away. I am going to continue. They failed to verify the identities of those responsible for acts of vandalism. That's too specific. So again, some answer choices will be too specific. That's a detail that wasn't included in the text. They overlooked accounts that present a less provocative view of feminist activism in Britain. It wasn't about the feminist activism in Britain. They're anticipating that you will select that because she referenced what was happening in Britain. But the whole paragraph was not about that. They ignored the distinction, a key distinction between American, again, not about that, right? That's not why she's criticizing, that's not why she's criticizing the logic. So we have to remember, and this is where it gets really important to have straight in our head, what is this question asking? As it's written, it's very confusing. So we have to remember that why is she criticizing the logic of her opponents? That's basically what it's asking. Okay, and in fact, this one is not a question, it's a complete this sentence, but sometimes it's helpful to reverse it, right? Like I said, put the other one into a statement. This one is put the statement into a question. So, why is she criticizing the thinking of her opponents? Um, they ignore a key distinction? No. They assume that feminists do not understand the normal political process? No, because it wasn't about the political process. So they misunderstood their reasons for using all of these strategies, because after all, the passage wasn't about the political process, it was about the strategies that they took to get what they wanted. So the answer is A. So huge thing, use your question flow, rely on what you've already done to help you with what you're doing now. Read the questions, identify any pronouns. What I should have put in there, and I will make it this correction, add something that is, make sure that you can flip it, like flip it from a statement to a question or a question to a statement, so that you understand the actually what this is trying to do, and put it into your own words. And so in this case, it would be, what is she trying to show about her opponents? Knowing what you've traced back in the pronoun. And then I suggest going back to the paragraph, even though it gives us this line. I know normally I don't say to go back to the text a lot if you're rushed for time, but do look at the very beginning or end. In this case, I focused in on the end of the paragraph. So this is the final question that we're going to review here. This is another type of question that asks, why would a writer use something? And so they're giving you a particular location. At this location, the writer uses something in order to something. So this is a lot like our rhetorical analysis essay work, that when we analyze speeches and we're identifying rhetorical devices, and saying why a writer would use them. Same thing. So here, at the end of the passage, the writer uses either or construction, right, in order to. So we want to go back to line 75 to 78. But first of all, know the word construction, right, is just an extra word in there to tell you that the either or words together is a construction. So you could just eliminate that word construction, but they use either or in order to do something. So we're going to put this into our own words, and the trick that I use for that is to flip it. And right now it is a complete this sentence type question. I want to flip it to an actual question because that is clearer, and it's also forcing us to understand and to put it into our own words. So just practice it and see how far you can get with this strategy, and build your skills with doing that immediately when you look at a question. And so that would be, why would the writer use either or? Isn't that simpler, right, than reading everything that is written? Okay, so let's figure that out. Let's go back to the passage, and here's the very end. In fact, here they say 75 through 78. I'm actually going to go up to 73, which is up here. So I advise you reading a little bit before and a little bit after, because in fact, 74, where the red is really our biggest clue. Okay, so they say they couldn't. At the end, if they couldn't do something, they would have to choose, right? They would have to make a choice of two evils, colon. And so that's why I read to the very beginning of the sentence. So remember, 75, where they told us to go, is not the beginning of that sentence. So backtrack it until you find the very beginning, okay? So they would have to choose between two evils. They would have to either, one, or they would have to two. Those are the two evils. So because they're two evils, they're not their first choices. They're not even their second choices. They're not their choice, not the one they wanted at all, but they would have to do one of two things, and both of them are a bad choice. And the first one is submit to an unjust. So submit to something unjust for an indefinite amount of time. So, just knowing what it means to submit to something. And then if I didn't, I could pick up on the word unjust. So that's the first one, not good. Or they would have to rise up. Sounds good, but they would have to rise up and adopt some of the antiquated means or ways by which men got their grievances remedied. Okay, that's a lot of old-fashioned language. So that one might not be as quick to interpret, but they would have to, antiquated is like old-fashioned, right? It's antique. So antiquated means, and again, you don't want to adopt the same things that the men have used in this manner, because she is stating that that they're in a position of power and that they might have gotten their powers in a way that is not as with integrity. Okay. Now, if we didn't understand that in the last sentence, if we kind of lose it at the last sentence, then just know that they made a choice between two evils, or they would have to, if they couldn't get what they wanted. So provide, so this is what they're banking on you to do, that if it's an either or construction, an either or sentence, provide two possible explanations. That's not the case. Either or is within the same sentence. So they would have to choose lesser of the two evils, right? So it's not even an explanation for why women have not yet won the right to vote. So offer two alternative methods of accomplishing the same goal. No, because they're not methods. It's just like, these are the two bad things that you're going to have, like lesser of two evils. So that does not work. Assert that patience is critical to smooth political transitions. That actually has nothing. There's always one that's like, no, it has nothing to do with it. That is the one. Nope. Imply that disruptive action may be the only way of resisting oppression in certain situations. Like that, it's like the only way of resisting oppression. Like they don't want oppression, they have to resist it. And the lesser of two evils is like, this is the only way you can. And then finally, so I'm going to put a question mark next to that, and then suggest that old-fashioned methods of creating political change may be superior to modern methods. They're not doing that, but that's a distractor because of the word antiquated. Someone who quickly reads that word is going to say, oh yeah, they used antiquated, so it must be that old-fashioned. But in fact, they're saying both choices are just really lousy, horrible choices. So it can't be E. And it, D, while I wasn't quite sure about the implying the disruptive action, it is something that says, look, this is the only way we're going to be able to do this. So again, it is process of elimination. I think the thing that really helped me here was reading a little bit before the lines, just to start with that whole complete sentence so that I understood. And I had this great phrase, the lesser of two evils. It's a really bad choice, right? In theory, I could have answered it just from that. Knowing what I knew and crossing off what I crossed off.